When Zoe bombarded me with a bunch of messages, I was indulging in a feast at the top-floor buffet of the L Hotel. The waiter brought me a plate of thick-cut salmon, and I picked up the smallest piece, pressing the fish into the lemon juice, skipping the chewing action, and swallowing it without changing my expression. Facing the camera in front of me, I shamelessly praised the salmon to the skies. The tender texture of the salmon and the extreme sourness of the lemon juice made me want to gag, but the hotel's most famous dish was its sashimi. Since I took on their restaurant promotion, I had to show some professional ethics, enthusiastically endorsing the raw and cold dishes that I didn't actually eat. I lifted a glass of sparkling cocktail, trying to control the nausea induced by psychological effects. At that moment, my dear cousin, Zoe, called me. In truth, I didn't want to answer her call, but knowing her well, if I didn't answer now, she would persist until I picked up. The moment I pressed the answer button, before I could ask her why she was calling, Zoe's voice eagerly sounded, "Sis, do you know that Jackson Sr. is back in the country?" The carbon dioxide released by the sparkling wine trapped my voice in my throat, making me sound slow for a second or two. I didn't know. Zoe seemed a bit disappointed. "Oh, I thought you knew." But she quickly regained her spirits. "Jackson Sr. is back this time to participate in the design work of our Sea-City sports arena. He said to stay in the country for a while." Even through the phone, I could feel her excitement as she described the project as if it were the most advanced thing in the world. Surprisingly, I didn't interrupt her with my usual impatience. Finally, she paused, and I had a bad feeling. She spoke with a flattering tone. "Sis, I heard that next week Jackson Sr. will give a lecture at S University. Can you help me get a ticket? But if you have any contact with Jackson Sr., getting a personally signed ticket would be even better." My head buzzed, and Zoe was a devoted fan of Jackson. According to her, ever since high school, when she saw Jackson's profile hanging in the Outstanding Graduates column, she developed a huge interest in architecture. However, Zoe not only failed to get into the top architecture program at S University but also missed getting into the adjacent L University. I took another sip of sparkling wine, trying to end our conversation. "I can't get one. I've been out of school for so many years, where can I get a ticket?" Zoe shamelessly suggested, "Why don't you just ask Jackson Sr. directly?" I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the urge to scold Zoe, but impulses were hard to control. "Can you have some shame? Jackson and I broke up 6 years ago." 6 years. Asking him for a signed ticket for you, I would think I'm crazy even if he didn't. There was silence on the other end for 2 seconds, then Zoe suddenly changed the topic. "Sis, I heard from my friend at S University that back in the day, in order to win over Jackson Sr., you spent a lot of money buying various gifts and eventually got him. But in the end, Jackson Sr. found out that you were truly superficial beneath the glamour, and couldn't develop a soul connection with you. So, he dumped you. Is that true?" If it weren't for Zoe, I really couldn't imagine that the story of Jackson and me had been circulating at S University for so many years, and it had spawned countless versions. Zoe waited expectantly for me to respond, but after glancing at the variety of dishes on the table that I hadn't finished tasting, I decisively ended the call and added her number to the blacklist. After hanging up, I wanted my assistant to continue shooting, but my gaze lingered on the phone on the table. "Just that one look," I suddenly said to the assistant. "Take a 5-minute break." The phone was picked up again, and I typed Jackson into the search engine. Soon, some of the latest news loaded. I clicked on an article about his arrival, ignoring the heavily written paragraphs, scrolling straight down to see Jackson's photos. In the pictures, he wasn't wearing glasses, politely shaking hands with the person receiving him. Every gesture was courteous, except for not liking to smile. Just like before. I got to know Jackson by coincidence, just like how I got into S University, another stroke of luck. I was a premature baby, born 6 months early and spent several months in an incubator. Doctors and my parents considered it a miracle that I survived. My parents had incredibly low expectations for me. Hello. One year, when my grades hit rock bottom in the class, the homeroom teacher called my parents. Before he could accuse me of my numerous crimes, my mom, in a tone full of wisdom, said, "Teacher, we don't expect our Evelyn to excel in academics. As long as she enjoys school, that's enough. You don't have to be too strict with her." The teacher was left speechless. My grades continued to lag until the time I decided to make a comeback. However, by then, everyone around me was already immersed in the intense review of senior year. Better late than never. Although my performance in the college entrance exam was not stellar, it was passable. When my younger brother checked my results, he even thought there was a mistake in the admission ticket. Originally, securing a place in an ordinary university was already a pleasant surprise. Little did I know that S University unexpectedly cut off admissions that year, and I, the one who randomly filled out the application, got lucky. A giant pie fell from the sky, pressing me beneath the S University Management Department's pie. My younger brother was shocked by this, and my older brother, relatively calm, raised an important question that would haunt my 4 years of college: will Evelyn graduate smoothly from S University? The younger brother was optimistic: university, just pass the exams, that's enough. The older brother was more composed: I think it might be a bit challenging. He predicted it right. Throughout my university life, every semester ended up being a last-minute cramming session, burning the midnight oil. Most subjects were barely passing the 60-point threshold. In the second semester of sophomore year, S University suddenly introduced a series of new policies, one of which required all departments that hadn't studied linear algebra to catch up. As a result, the management department and the architecture department, from our year, were combined for classes. It was during this time that I met Jackson. Professor Robert, who taught linear algebra, mainly used problem-solving in class and loved to ask questions and take attendance. Rumor had it that this professor was famous in the mathematics department for accurately throwing chalk with great precision. However, since the school switched to whiteboards, this skill of his was almost lost. The girl in the white top in the third-to-last row, what's the answer to the fourth question? This was the third class, and I was staring blankly at the densely packed numbers on the blackboard. When I heard Professor Robert call someone, I suddenly woke up. I looked around, hoping it wasn't someone from our major. When I turned my head, I realized everyone was looking at me. Eventually, I discovered that the unfortunate one was me. I sent a pleading look to my neighboring classmates, but fellow math strugglers, they raised their empty exercise sheets, indicating their helplessness. I glanced around, really wanting to stand up and say, I don't know, but I saw, on the left side, a desk just one seat away from me with a full stack of papers. The professor said, don't bother looking, I'm calling on you. I quickly reached out, grabbed the stack of papers within arm's reach, and calmly held it in my hand, as if the solutions were written by me. The answer is 2. I explained the process, and the old man seemed satisfied. He said, this question is quite challenging. You're from the management department, not bad. What's your name? I stood there stunned, and hesitantly reported my name. The professor waved his hand, signaling me to sit down. Evelyn, right? I'll remember you. My fellow department friends covered their mouths, suppressing their laughter. I felt like I had thrown a stone at my own foot. It took about 5 minutes after sitting down for me to realize that I had touched someone else's test paper. I quickly handed the papers back to the person on my left. It was a guy with gold-rimmed glasses, sitting upright with a blank expression on his face. I whispered, thank you, classmate. It was an emergency just now, sorry. The guy didn't turn to look at me, just said, it's okay, and continued writing and drawing in his book. I stuck out my tongue, turned to my roommate, and whispered, the architecture students are really something. His paper was filled from top to bottom. My roommate looked at me with an expression as if I were mentally challenged. Don't you know him? I shook my head in confusion. My roommate sighed helplessly. He's Jackson, the big shot with a full score in the architecture department. Getting a full score in the competitive architecture department meant he was quite exceptional. I looked at him a bit more. The morning sunlight at 9 o'clock wasn't too harsh. It reflected through the glass window onto the table, casting warm sunlight on Jackson's hand, forming a fuzzy halo. In the shadow, his profile looked captivating. I gave a thumbs up and said to my roommate, well, a handsome guy from the aesthetic department. Indeed, he was very handsome, or rather, he exuded an indescribable aura, cool, polite, and aloof. Combined with his sharply defined face, it made me marvel. None of the guys in our management department could compare. I took out 2 cans of peach-flavored soda from my bag. Originally, one was meant for my roommate, but I pushed both cans slowly towards Jackson on the desk next to me. I gave a pleasing smile, hoping that this big shot wouldn't mind my earlier rudeness. Please have a soda. I whispered. He didn't push back the can of peach soda, nor did he open it. My roommate observed my every move, kicked my foot, and said, what's up? Are you going after him? A lot of people are chasing after him. Admittedly, I wasn't someone who fell in love at first sight. At this moment, I was just appreciating Jackson's handsome appearance. I kicked back and said, no, just thanking him for the help. The blackboard was filled with complex processes that I couldn't understand. The sunlight became warmer, and I lay on the table, sneakily opening my soda. The pull tab made a light click sound, and as I lay next to the can, I could distinctly hear the bubbles inside rushing to the top. Jackson probably finished a question, turned his head slightly, glanced at me lying on the table, then turned back. I sat up, took a sip of the soda, and the faint peach flavor flowed from my tongue to my stomach, temporarily making me forget the annoyance of not understanding the class. Evelyn, how would you solve this problem? Professor Robert accurately threw an oily pen cap onto my head, interrupting my discreet anime watching during class. Since old Wang lost the chance to throw chalk, he quickly discovered that he could still throw oily pen caps. The only condition was that I had to pick up the cap for him after class, as he would remind me before leaving, Evelyn, pick up the pen cap for me. This time, the question wasn't too difficult, at least my roommate managed to solve it, saving me from a crisis. However, with my keen insight, I realized that I had caught the attention of the old man. Probably, this semester was going to be very painful for me. How about asking the class monitor to sit with you during class? When old Wang calls on you, you can at least touch an answer. My roommate suggested when school was over. I shook my head repeatedly, holding a book in one hand and a box of milk in the other. She's too proud and speaks sarcastically. It's better not to go. With the final exam being so difficult and the high weight of regular grades, how about saving some face? My roommate was even more concerned about my GPA than I was. While we were talking, Jackson walked past me. I bit the milk straw, watching Jackson's gradually retreating figure, shaking my head and saying to my roommate, "No need to worry, the hermit has a plan." So, that night, I stationed myself downstairs at the architecture building, cornering Jackson as he left the teaching building after drawing until the lights went out. "Jackson Sr., hold on." Since he was a grade above me, it was only appropriate to use a respectful address when asking for a favor. Jackson stood still. The weather hadn't warmed up yet, and there was still a bit of chill in the night. He was wearing a long black windbreaker, making him appear tall and slim. "Do you need something?" he asked, hands in his pockets, standing high and looking down at me. I couldn't detect any emotion in his voice, which made me a bit uneasy. However, recalling the sharp-tongued class monitor, I quickly gathered courage. "Senior, can I sit next to you in linear algebra class from now on?" I put on a very pleasing smile. Jackson didn't speak, and I sneakily glanced at his expression. He remained calm, but I could guess that he found me a bit strange and was contemplating how to politely refuse. So, before he could speak, I preempted him. "I don't mean that. I just want to ask if I can sit next to you and copy your answers." This time, Jackson truly fell silent. There were probably quite a few girls who had stopped him for heartfelt confessions, but none had cornered him, begging to copy his homework. I raised both hands, taking out my secret weapon, a big bag of snacks. It included cookies, drinks, fruits, meal replacements, and more. I handed it to him. "Don't worry, the hermit has a plan," I said with confidence, looking at him as he remained silent. Then, I quickly ran away, leaving him with a parting remark: "If Senior doesn't like these, share them with your roommate." Vlog completion occurred around 10 p.m. After thoroughly capturing the footage, I practically tried every dish, filling my stomach to the brim. Exiting the hotel, I said to my assistant, "Let's not take on too many restaurant promotions in the future. Let's stick to our fashion vlogs. Not everyone can be a food blogger, especially someone like me with a small and picky appetite." At night, the red traffic light still demanded a lengthy wait, with the countdown digits reaching the 90s. I rubbed my slightly bloated stomach and told my assistant, "Later, put me at the front and I'll walk back. It'll help with digestion." My house is located in a small neighborhood not far behind S University. Walking from here, crossing the vast teaching area, and exiting through the side gate, it takes about 40 minutes to reach home. The dim lights depicted the tall trees on both sides of the school path in a scattered yet artistic manner. At this hour, after classes, students jogging past me in a hurry, occasional groups heading for late-night snacks with laughter fading away in the wind. I walked slowly, the discomfort in my stomach rising in waves. It felt as if the carbonated drinks were continuously releasing gas, the semi-cooked meat and salad irritating my already fragile mucous membranes. The small piece of salmon seemed to have gained enormous presence, shouting to pierce through my throat. I glanced around, knowing the nearest restroom was a few hundred meters away in the teaching building. What caught my eye was a sports car with a prominent Mercedes logo on it. Walking a few steps, I couldn't help but complain about the opulence of this school. The students seemed so luxurious, but of course, at this moment, I deliberately ignored the fact that I was once like them. Enduring the discomfort to prevent myself from vomiting on the sports car, I continued swallowing the sourness in my throat. The night cicadas almost pierced through my eardrums. Unable to endure any longer, I hurriedly walked a few steps, leaning against a tree. I emptied the contents of my stomach, feeling deeply sorry for the tree and the car parked beside it. After all, I had engaged in a form of class discrimination, bullying the car because it looked modest. I had just managed to soil its wheels with impurities. Squatting on the ground, I took a moment to recover. Suddenly, the car lights next to me flashed, momentarily blinding me. The lights quickly dimmed, and as I looked up, I saw a person coming out through the door. The abrupt change in brightness made it difficult for my pupils to focus temporarily. I could only see the person's vague silhouette. At that moment, my heart pounded. Earlier, I couldn't hold on and thought the owner of the car had come to confront me. Instead, he handed me a tissue and a bottle of water without saying a word. I thanked him, and as I uttered the words, I felt my current state must be quite miserable. At the same time, I deeply felt sorry for both the tree and the car owner. I stood up with difficulty, supporting myself against the tree trunk. When I focused again, I saw a face that was extremely familiar. A face I had looked at for 2 whole years, a face I had seen just 3 hours ago in the pictures of an article. Later, as I recalled that moment, I felt a great admiration for myself. Even in that awkward moment, I managed to steal another glance at the car Jackson was driving. It was a black Land Rover, low-key and restrained, perfectly matching Jackson's temperament. I had mistakenly thought it was a less prestigious brand. The bottle of mineral water was still unopened. I tried to open it, but the cap was a bit tight. It rubbed my knuckles painfully, but I kept a straight face. Exerting a hidden force, I forcefully twisted the cap open. Jackson leaned against the car door, silent. I rinsed my mouth and put the water back in my bag. Then, I took out my wallet. "Long time no see, unexpectedly I dirted your car. I'll cover the car wash." There were 100 yuan bills lying quietly in my wallet. I was grateful that I had brought cash today, preventing potential trouble in the future. I took out a few bills, holding them up to Jackson. He didn't even look at them. No need. In the end, I didn't hand the money to him. First, I knew he didn't need that car wash fee. Second, 8 years ago, I forcefully stuffed that large snack gift bag into his arms, which led to the subsequent story. 8 years later, I didn't want to repeat the same mistake. Backlit by the light, Jackson's figure cast a long shadow in front of him. His facial expression was dark and unclear, but his voice remained unchanged, just like it was years ago. He said, "Get in, I'll take you home." My hand gripped the bag, fingertips chilled by the night wind while the palm sweated. I looked him in the eyes and said, "No need, I'll walk back." He opened the car door, his tone sounding like he was stating a report. "In theory, with gastroenteritis, you should go to the hospital for an 4 drip. If not, you should also avoid exercising." I stood there stunned. His voice was calm, but I sensed a hint of mockery. He said, "You wouldn't think I still have any ulterior motives toward you, would you?" When Jackson entered the classroom, I had already secured an excellent spot, waiting for him. A seat by the window, 3rd row from the back. Good lighting, good position. It allowed me to daydream while looking out the window and formed a diagonal line with Professor Robert's podium, reducing the chances of him noticing me. My roommate arrived and sat behind me. She pinched the soft flesh of my cheek, sending me a WeChat message with just 4 words, "Distracted by appearance, forget friends." I took a sip of milk, giving her a thumbs up emoji. I replied on WeChat, "I'm counting on this semester's homework answers." As I spoke, I took out 2 more boxes of milk from my bag. One for my roommate and the other pushed in front of Jackson. During the class, I realized that, for the 2-hour session, Jackson only focused on solving problems for the first 20 minutes. The rest of the time, he immersed himself in his drawing endeavors. Meanwhile, I diligently copied his neatly written answers. After a couple of classes, leveraging Jackson's exercise answers, I sailed smoothly through Mr. Wang's lectures, and each time, my savior brought me a generous portion of snacks. Jackson seemed perfectly content with this arrangement. Gradually, some classmates caught on, and a small rumor mill quickly circulated. Well-meaning classmates asked me, "Evelyn, are you pursuing Jackson?" Others, concerned for me, said, "Their architectural program is too demanding, he might not have time for a relationship." I lounged on the enormous dormitory swing, solemnly declaring, "Cross my heart, I'm just forced by Robert, wanting to copy Jackson's homework." However, no one believed me. Soon, the gossiping buddies formed 3 factions. The first faction, led by Jackson's friend from the architecture department, encouraged me to go for it, thinking that while the possibility of Jackson dating someone was low, I should give it a shot. The second faction, consisting of my close friends, thought my courage was commendable. They believed I could boldly pursue the campus heartthrob. The third faction, the largest, composed of bystanders, believed I was an invincible cockroach, pestering Jackson every day, but would eventually be heartlessly rejected. I was left speechless, and the person in question, my classmate Jackson, was oblivious to all this. Our first formal conversation occurred in class. The weather was getting warmer, and the classroom had the air conditioning on. Feeling cold, I wrapped myself in my jacket, leaned on the desk, and diligently copied the homework answers. Jackson's voice rang out above me, "You copied the wrong question." I turned my head abruptly, glancing at Jackson's calm face. After comparing our exercise papers, I realized he was right. I dropped my pen, covered my face, and let out a regretful sound. Professor Robert was fervently explaining a challenging problem on the podium, shouting, "Isn't it fascinating and interesting?" I, below, looked painfully at the incomprehensible process, muttering, "Why is it so difficult to copy even?" Jackson took the paper from under my claws, looked at it, and then asked me, "Can you understand the process?" I sat up straight, honestly shaking my head. "Do you know what you're going to do for the final exam next month?" "The exam is coming up." Jackson put down the paper, fingers resting on the book, and casually asked. I flipped open the textbook, sighed, and threw the book onto the table. "I don't know." But Jackson seemed prepared. He pulled out a few sheets of paper from his drawings, handed them to me, and said, "These are the professor's summaries of the final exams from the past few years. It's basically the same questions with different phrasing. Take a look, and if you don't understand anything, come ask me." My eyes widened, and I almost had the urge to kneel and thank him. I was grateful to the point of tears. "Really?" As the bell rang, he packed up and prepared to leave. He casually said, "Building 408 in the architectural college. I'm usually there drawing." I grabbed the sleeve of his shirt, probably looking too much like a fawning puppy. I felt him smile and said, "Bro, let me treat you to a meal." The school cafeteria bustled with activity as we deliberately avoided the crowd, sitting in a corner. When I stood up to buy drinks, Jackson said, "I'll go." The meal was ordinary, and my appetite was still good. After finishing, I could even gulp down a large cup of green bean soup. Jackson said, "Remember to go through the past year's test papers." I nodded hurriedly. Returning to the dorm, my roommate said, "I think Jackson is pretty nice to you." I lounged back in my swing, took out the test papers, and said, "Probably because he hasn't seen someone with such a lack of talent in studying." There weren't many questions on the paper, mostly basic ones that I could understand. Although we all think he likes gentle girls like him, what if this high mountain flower likes your unique style? I pulled out a pen from the holder and leisurely started solving problems. Midway, I checked Jackson's almost empty moments on my phone and sent him a message, "I feel like I can figure this out." Perhaps humans are creatures influenced by words. As these gossip messages continued to enter my ears, I even felt that I indeed had some interest in Jackson. But how much interest was that? I didn't know. Of course, I also didn't know if Jackson had any interest in me. Building 408 became a place I frequently visited. Jackson's problem-solving approach was often straightforward. He didn't care if I understood, he just taught me many exam strategies, enough to get me through the finals. Occasionally, I would look at the drawings on his desk and a stack of draft papers, and with a lack of self-awareness, ask him, "What subject is this?" Structural mechanics. He picked up the draft papers, crumpled them into a ball, and threw them in the trash. I glanced at the book, confirmed with my gaze, it wasn't a subject of linear algebra's difficulty level. On the night after the linear algebra exam, I went to 408 again. Jackson was the only one in the classroom. I knocked on the door, and he raised his head, started packing up. "Working on the final project?" Hearing that the architectural college's final assessment was extremely strict, almost all students pulled all-nighters to complete their assignments. But he put away his things. "Do you need something from me?" I stuttered, but couldn't say anything. "Nothing, just passing by." Actually, there was something. I thought, since I won't have classes with the architectural college in the future, I won't have an excuse to visit Jackson in 408. Whether I ask or not, it's a 50-50 chance. I wanted to ask Jackson if he had any plans for a relationship. I had the wording all planned out. I would straightforwardly ask, "Can I pursue you?" But when he was in front of me, I couldn't say anything. He walked to the door, turned off the light, and said, "Let's go, I'll walk you back." Only then did I realize I was a coward. With him right in front of me, I couldn't ask anything and just followed him slowly. He was tall, standing a bit taller than me. I looked down at the ground, shoes stepping into his shadow. I twiddled my fingers around my clothes, wrinkling the corners. The dormitory building was close by. He broke the silence first. "I originally wanted to wait until after the exams to find you." Leaves on the trees along the path rustled in the wind. Jackson stopped, turned to look at me. Backlit, his expression was unclear. In the dim light, he suddenly leaned down and kissed me. His lips were dry, so close that I could even smell the scent of his shampoo, like the fragrance of grass. Before I could react, he straightened up, standing a foot away from me, as if nothing had just happened. "I don't know if it's too sudden, but Evelyn, I really like you. I don't know if you would be my girlfriend." The Land Rover's interior was spacious, offering great comfort. In this model, there were no CDs, no radio playing, only the subtle sound of the engine broke the silence. I felt uneasy in this quiet atmosphere, but Jackson remained calm and composed. Even in the short 15-minute journey, I began to sense a growing sense of oppression by the 5th minute. "How long will you stay this time?" I was the first to break the silence. 3 or 4 months, mainly depending on the progress of the drawings. The topic ended there. He wasn't eager to engage in conversation. I glanced out the window. At this point, it was already the time for dormitory access restrictions, and the surrounding students were gradually decreasing, making the area less bustling. The car stopped at a red light. The 24-hour McDonald's at the intersection emitted warm yellow light. Since breaking up with Jackson, I hadn't eaten at McDonald's even once. Back then, Jackson controlled me tightly, almost never giving me the chance to eat junk food. One day, my wisdom teeth started acting up, swelling like a pig's head when inflamed. I went to the dental hospital to have the tooth pulled. Even after pulling the tooth, my face remained swollen. The doctor said I could eat some ice cream, so I, using a chicken feather as a command arrow, insisted on eating a McFlurry from the McDonald's behind the teaching building. The second McFlurry was half price, and Jackson, following my command, bought 2 cups. I slurped down my Coke and ice cream, then went to drink his Sprite. 2 drinks, and I finished 1.5. Later, during the countless days of self-study in 408, I would often insist on drinking McFlurry. Initially, Jackson tried to stop me, but in the end, he sighed and went to buy it for me. Eventually, I didn't even need to say anything, a glance was enough, and he silently went downstairs to order. I glanced at Jackson while slightly turning my head. He wore a black quartz watch on his wrist, similar to the one I bought that year. The only difference was that the watch from before, he had returned to me, placing it in a pile of miscellaneous items when we broke up. The traffic light turned from red to green, the car started, and McDonald's became more distant. I hadn't drunk McFlurry for many years, and to avoid seeing it, I even refused to enter McDonald's. The silence in the car persisted. I tried to say something, but Jackson said, "We've arrived." His voice was indifferent. I looked around the residential area. Indeed, we had reached our destination. It was only a 15-minute journey, and it turned out to be this short. I loosened my seatbelt, prepared to open the door when Jackson suddenly asked, "Don't you have anything to tell me?" My movements froze in midair. In reality, my mind couldn't find a word to say, much like when Robert asked me, "What's the answer to this question?" all those years ago. But I knew I shouldn't say nothing. So I said, "Thank you for driving me back." He was cold on the surface but warm-hearted inside. He used to appear like a high mountain flower, but in reality, he was kind-hearted. Even now, his gentlemanly upbringing wouldn't allow him to leave me, seemingly with a stomachache, in that alley. He seemed to self-mockingly chuckle. I heard it vaguely. He said, "I do have something I want to ask you." I leaned back slightly. "Ask me what?" The car engine turned off, and he placed his hand on the steering wheel. He said, "These past few years, I've occasionally wondered why you broke up with me." My gaze gradually lowered. I pressed my finger on the phone's volume button, sometimes pressing it and sometimes releasing it. Didn't I make it clear at the time? In my senior year, I said I couldn't stand his strict control and that his controlling personality made me feel suffocated. My affection for him gradually wore away under the strict management. In short, I just didn't love him anymore. Thinking back, Those words were too hurtful, making him ponder for so many years. But Jackson turned his head, his gaze sizing me up, finally stopping on my eyes. If I didn't go to the United States at that time, would you still be with me? His words stabbed at the deepest weakness in my heart, but I faced him squarely, absolutely not. The light in his eyes gradually dimmed. I thought he was sad, just like me. I was also sad. Jackson, you've never failed before, so it's hard for you to accept failure with me. But what does it matter? Look, I'm doing well, and you're doing well too. No one can't live without someone else. Silence filled the car once again. This time, even the sound of the engine was absent. Jackson self-mockingly repeated my words, no one can't live without someone else. He said, Evelyn, you're really heartless. You forget when you say you forget. I didn't want to talk more, opened the door calmly, got out of the car, and the black Land Rover sped away. I stood there, motionless for a long time. It felt like there was a big hole in my chest, and something like sand was slowly pouring out of that hole, making it hard for me to catch my breath. Before the doorbell rang, I had a dream from my university days. In the dream, I was hanging out with friends from the same club. After having supper together, I drove my newly acquired sports car to take my classmates back to the dormitory. The parking was not great, and I casually left the car on the side of a small alley behind the dormitory. The scene shifted, and my roommates and I were cutting a watermelon. They asked me in shock, did you really win over Jackson? Watermelon juice dripped from my fingertips to the floor, and I hastily grabbed a tissue to wipe it up. That sports car was left to gather dust in the garage. I obediently reviewed accounting with Jackson pressing my head. Those tedious and unfamiliar case studies bored me, and just as I was about to take a break to play with my phone, Jackson sighed softly in my ear, Evelyn, focus. The doorbell rang, and I looked up at the empty ceiling, unsure of the time. Seeing no one was opening the doorbell rang for the second time. I wearily checked the time on my phone. It was a little after 3 in the afternoon. It wasn't too early for this, so I had to crawl out of my soft bed with my eyes closed and walked unsteadily to open the door. Outside, Zoe had a charming smile on her face. As soon as I opened the door, she rushed into the room like a rabbit and collapsed on the sofa like a boneless creature. I touched my slightly swollen face, my voice hoarse, what are you here for? Zoe sat up straight, placing a big bag of food she brought on the table. I guessed you hadn't had lunch yet, so I brought you lunch. The veins on my temple throbbed. I said, do you know I stayed up all night writing copy until dawn? Perhaps inherited from me, Zoe was equally good at throwing a tantrum. Sis, I'm out of money. My dad cut off my living expenses. I want to go on a self-driving trip to Tibet. Can you give me some money? I had a severe headache. Is Tibet where you want to go? No one will know even if you die there, and you want to go on a road trip? No wonder your second uncle cut off your living expenses. After a few rounds of this, Zoe, seeing that I wasn't yielding, awkwardly sat there. I poured myself a glass of water and sipped it against the wall. But then, Zoe took out 2 tickets from her bag. Sis, there's a lecture by Senior Jackson tonight. I got 2 tickets. Want to go together? The water was a bit hot, nearly scalding my tongue. I reflexively waved my hand, no, thanks. Zoe seemed to forget what just happened and sat beside me. Don't you want to see how your ex is doing? Besides, no one is accompanying me. Let's go together. I wanted to tell her that I had already seen him half a month ago, but I looked at the 2 tickets and inexplicably said, sure. As the ancients said, a good ex should be treated as if they were dead. I truly wasn't a good ex, so I could only find a corner to play dead in the large lecture hall that could accommodate 300 people. Zoe was dissatisfied with my choice of seating, but faced with my stern expression, she had to hold back her complaints. Jackson took the stage, and applause echoed from below. Today, he wore a light blue shirt without a tie, giving a formal yet approachable impression. I surveyed the surroundings, and the audience could be roughly divided into 2 camps, the serious juniors who came to learn from his experiences and the enthusiastic fanboys and fangirls like Zoe. Jackson's voice was deep and steady. At first, he talked about his personal experiences that I could understand. As the content progressed, it delved into various academic disciplines. Zoe next to me sighed, sis, Senior Jackson doesn't seem like someone you can win over by splurging money. On the stage, Jackson held the microphone in his left hand, and the quartz watch on his wrist exposed a pain that made my heart ache. Jackson was a good candidate for a relationship. He never hid his relationship status from others. In our first year together, I gave him a quartz watch, and he never took it off since then. In our second year together, I gifted him a set of triangular color pencils, a limited edition of 240 colors. He kept them in the dorm, and when asked by classmates, he openly replied, "My girlfriend gave them to me." With such stories circulating, combined with my reputation in the management department, when the tales reached my ears, they transformed into a rich second generation angrily throwing gifts to win over the college heartthrob. I said softly, "His family is well off, don't believe the rumors." I was absent-minded, and Zoe, seeing that I was willing to talk to her, perked up. "Then why did you break up?" The large auditorium in the college lecture hall had not been renovated for years. I was familiar with the layout of this room. At that time, I accompanied Jackson to listen to many lectures here. Now, I still sat under the stage, and the people beside me had changed, while Jackson had become the one on stage. I said, he had to go to the United States, and I didn't want to go. Zoe and I probably shared a common life pursuit. Both of us wanted to be idle and carefree spendthrifts. Additionally, considering her deep understanding of my parents, she fully understood my reluctance to study abroad. She continued to inquire, "But that doesn't mean you can't have a long-distance relationship." I shook my head, eyes fixed on Jackson leaning against the lectern. "It's very difficult." The duration of study at the university was 5 years. When I was in my 4th year and he in his 5th, Jackson received a full scholarship and a direct admission offer from a foreign school for a PhD. Before that, we had discussed the issue of studying abroad. For someone like me, if I wanted to go abroad, it would be best to apply for a master's program with lectures and then find a marketing job abroad. I said I needed more time to think about it, but in my heart, I had long rejected this plan. America was far away, and my parents and 2 brothers would definitely vote against it. My parents were my weak spot, and I didn't want them to worry about me day and night. Later, Jackson said, "The training system at S University is also good. I can stay." I was shocked to hear this. He casually mentioned 2 plans. First, we would go abroad together, and second, he would stay in China to accompany me. Regardless of the plan, I was forever within his plans. Zoe asked, "What if, at that time, he stayed, would you still be together?" Now in the question and answer session, many students raised their hands, and Jackson's gaze scanned the audience, selecting students to ask questions. Several times, I felt like his gaze landed on me. I said, for him, the best choice is to go abroad. There, he has a better platform and mentors, so staying here is not a possibility. Zoe persisted, "I meant what if." "There's no what if. If he stayed, he wouldn't be the Jackson I like." As the lecture came to an end, I stood up and walked out with the crowd. My phone vibrated in my palm, and in the crowded space, I answered the call. The voice that was just confidently speaking in the lecture hall sounded in my ear, "Why did you come to listen to my lecture?" I stood still, moving the phone away to see the familiar number on the screen. After all these years, he hadn't changed. I turned around, looking at the distant podium through a door and the crowd. Jackson held the phone, patiently waiting for my response. It wasn't just a misconception earlier, his gaze had indeed fallen on me. My face suddenly burned, like the time I vowed to diligently memorize vocabulary for the CET 6 and was caught playing games by him. I stammered, "I came to accompany my cousin." He replied, "I have something to pick up, wait for me." It seems that all the reunions with Jackson happen at S University. Without a backpack, I could only slip my hands into the pockets of my windbreaker, walking slowly beside Jackson. His voice was a bit hoarse, probably from the 2.5-hour lecture just now, making his throat uncomfortable. "I've watched your videos. They're quite interesting." I never thought he would spend time watching those boring videos. Just sharing some daily life. Initially, it was indeed about sharing daily life. After all, after graduating, I did achieve my wish to lie flat. Those videos gained popularity over time and gradually became my job. When we broke up, I returned all the things Jackson gave me. He did the same and added a sentence, saying that I would always live in utopia, not aligning with reality. I said, "Thanks to you, whenever I find work too tiring and feel exhausted, I think of you, smart and hardworking. It gives me the motivation to persist." I spoke in a light tone, as if making a joke. He suddenly stopped, turned to look at me, and said, "Why do you still speak so carelessly?" I looked at him blankly. I thought my words were just right, neither distant nor intimate, with a well-balanced tone. He changed the topic. "I watched your videos. It seems like you haven't been in a relationship." I smirked, casually responding, "I haven't found anyone better than you." He frowned. "Do you have to talk to me like this?" I realized I was still a bit afraid of him. His authoritative tone made me a well-behaved little chicken. But I went along with his words. Although our matter has been put to rest for a long time, when I look for a partner, I always compare and fear getting someone too inferior, lowering the average level of boyfriends. His voice, like the cold air these days, was icy. In my case, it's not put to rest. He stated it straightforwardly, and I suddenly couldn't react. He continued, in the first 2 years of my studies, I kept thinking about it. At first, I felt quite resentful towards you. Later, I tried to forget you, but the more I tried, the more I hated you. The more I hated you, the more I tried to forget you. He suddenly became serious. I dared not speak when the word hate came out of his mouth. It was easy to see that my words and actions were insane. Back then, he must have genuinely wanted to be with me, and I heartlessly crushed that beautiful dream. I'm not a fool. Some things, I couldn't understand at first, but later, I thought, and I finally figured it out. He took a step towards me, very close enough to trap me in his line of sight, pinning me in place. I want to ask you again, if I hadn't gone to the United States back then, would we still be together? I opened my mouth to refute, but he interrupted me. Before I returned to China, I had already resigned from the Design Institute where my mentor worked. After completing the project of the Sea City Sports Center, I officially ended my job in the United States. He spoke briefly, but I couldn't seem to understand the content of these few sentences. After a while, I mumbled, "You're insane." His hand pressed on my shoulder, and he said, "You always lie to me. I just want to hear one truthful sentence." I felt like a deflated balloon, my feet weak. However, I didn't directly answer him. "Jackson, during college, you won the national award for 5 consecutive years. Your legend is still circulating in the university. Even now, look at those younger students, they worship you. Temporary infatuations are impulsive. Even though I may be foolish, I understand this principle. I didn't want you to go abroad for me, nor did I want you to stay for me. I definitely didn't want you to stay and then gradually let our relationship deteriorate, ending in mutual resentment." He stared directly at me. "Is that what you think?" I nodded. "Regardless of the comparison, going abroad for your studies was the best deal. If we hadn't broken up at that time, you would definitely have stayed, right?" He remained silent. At this moment, it seemed like I had the upper hand. I chuckled, but I can't afford to gamble. Regardless, I shouldn't be your stumbling block, and I dare not gamble that our feelings won't deteriorate. These words I had kept bottled up for many years were finally spoken out casually. It felt like a relief. The hand on my shoulder gradually tightened, making my bones ache. I looked up, and he lowered his voice, saying angrily, "You don't understand me at all." After saying that, he kissed me, just like he did many years ago. But this time, he used force with his teeth, ruthlessly biting my lips. The taste of rusty blood flowed to the back of my tongue, and I pushed him away abruptly. Not ending on good terms. The doorbell rang once again, and in my heart, I cursed Zoe for disturbing my peaceful sleep every day. Last night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Jackson's words, "Can we try again?" echoed in my mind. I finally fell asleep at dawn, only to be awakened now. I woke up with instant irritation. I abruptly opened the door, and my anger dissipated in an instant. Jackson was standing outside. I silently lowered my head and took a moment to assess my appearance in pajamas without grooming. I stood there in a daze until the soul that had left in anger returned to my senses. I asked, still in a daze, "How did you come here?" Jackson was wearing a black hoodie, showing no signs of being a man about to turn 30. He handed me the paper bag in his hand and said, "I brought you breakfast." At that moment, I felt like I had been struck by lightning. I even felt like I was still in a dream. I looked at the white porridge and small sweet cakes in the bag, then looked at the calm Jackson. It was hard to understand why he had come to my house so early just to deliver breakfast. "How did you know where I live?" It wasn't an accusation, but a sincere question from the heart. He glanced at his watch. "I asked your classmate." I tried hard to recall, deep in my memory, and indeed, he had added my roommate on WeChat. I hadn't expected him not to delete it. I looked at the somewhat tidy room and finally regained some composure. "Do you want to come in and sit for a while?" Jackson pressed the down button of the elevator. "No, I'm heading to the Design Institute." He seemed like a dream, coming when I wasn't fully awake and leaving when I wasn't fully awake. Until I became more awake, feeling speechless and helpless, he disturbed my sleep last night and even brought me breakfast today as if nothing had happened. Mr. Jackson is indeed a ruthless person. For the next half-month, this cycle repeated. He would leave the breakfast and leave without saying much. Until the weekend, I, a habitual late riser, couldn't bear it any longer. I opened the door and asked him directly, "Jackson, what exactly do you want?" I strongly suspected that he wanted to torture me, making me unable to figure out the situation and making me collapse and die from waking up early. This would be his revenge for my past actions. He maintained his usual polite expression, with a gentle look in his eyes. Based on my experience of spending more than 600 days with him, he seemed to be in a good mood. He said, "I've only been in a relationship with you before and don't have much experience pursuing someone. So, I can only bring you breakfast every day." I truly felt like I had been struck by lightning or he had been struck by lightning. I remained calm. "Have you been cursed recently?" He looked composed. "I feel that I can't forget you. I thought you might not be able to forget me either, so why can't we give it a try?" How did his life in the United States transform him into someone so narcissistic? Although I had to admit, he was right. I pointed at my unkempt self. "Don't you think I haven't made any progress in all these years? Still not seeking progress, living in utopia." He surveyed me up and down. "This is good. You're responsible for being happy, and I'll take care of making money." I was speechless, unable to respond instantly. I admired his positive attitude. He brainwashed himself directly when discipline didn't work, accepting me as his non-ambitious partner. His expression suddenly became serious. "Evelyn, I haven't made it clear to you. You always think I should be the person at the top of the pyramid, but I'm not. My aspirations aren't as high as you imagine. I've already achieved the career height I wanted. I just want you." He put down the breakfast. Today, there was soy milk and Chinese crullers. He said, "Take your time to think. I'll wait for you to decide." Outside the window, thunder rumbled, and the winter air pressure gradually dropped. The first winter rain fell while I was sleeping restlessly. The cold wind from outside the window woke me up, and I got up to close the window. I checked the time on my phone. It was a little after 7 in the morning. Perhaps due to the overcast sky, the weather was gloomy, and the chaotic city seemed not to have fully awakened from the night. However, I, awakened by the cold wind, sat on the windowsill for a long time. When I finally felt cold, I slowly walked to the wardrobe, took out the winter coat, and wrapped it around myself. There was a box of miscellaneous items in the wardrobe. After pondering for a long time, I decided to take out the tightly sealed box and open it. The winter rain drizzled down, and when I checked the time again, I realized I had been lost in thought for too long. It was already past 8. I wondered what breakfast would be today. I also wondered if Jackson brought an umbrella. After much contemplation, I decided to take an umbrella and headed out, walking towards the entrance of the community. At 8:30 in the morning, he should have already rung my doorbell on a typical day, but he hadn't shown up today. Standing in the drizzle for a while, occasionally refreshing the latest gossip news on my phone, my exposed hand turned slightly red from the cold. Until that black car stopped on the opposite side of the road, Jackson got out with a paper bag. Only then did I slowly put my phone back in my pocket. He hurriedly crossed the road, and at that moment, I admired my extraordinary foresight. Indeed, he didn't have an umbrella in his car. I waved to him, and he hurriedly walked to my side, a hint of displeasure still on his face. "Why did you come out?" As he spoke, he shook my hand without saying a word, perhaps realizing that my hand was freezing like ice, and his expression turned serious. I seemed not to notice, handed him the umbrella, and took the breakfast from his hands. Opening it, I found a portion of chicken soup dumplings. I put my hands inside to warm them on the plastic container, feeling the steaming heat of the freshly made dumplings. Jackson pulled up the zipper of my coat, tugged at my clothes, and walked, talking without hesitation. "How did you run out?" I handed him the umbrella, took the breakfast from his hands, opened it, and examined it. It contained chicken soup dumplings. Placing my hands inside to warm them against the plastic container, I could still feel the scalding sensation of the freshly made dumplings. Jackson pulled up the zipper of my coat, tugged at my clothes, and walked hastily. I suddenly said, "Tomorrow, I want to have McDonald's breakfast, preferably the one with eggs." He remained silent, and I felt he was a bit angry. Taking a deep breath, the winter's cold entered my chest through my throat. I continued, "Jackson, I don't know if 6 years have changed you and me or what will happen in the future." The old black quartz watch, which had been held in the palm of my left hand for a long time, warmed up. I took it out and handed it to Jackson. Exhaling carbon dioxide into the air, it froze into a burst of white smoke. "But I think, maybe we can give it another try." My heart pounded as if this sentence had taken 6 years of courage. He had taken so many steps, but I always had to take one. We folded the umbrella under the eaves. The winter rain fell heavily, and the bag of chicken soup dumplings was still steaming. Jackson said, "Okay.